Hello guys, welcome to DrNightStare. I know you guys come here to relax and take a nap. So before we go, please hit like and subscribe. By the way, also tell me what time and where you guys listening from. Alright then. That Christmas Eve, Clara was filled with a nervous excitement to visit her new boyfriend Leo's parents. She had become quite smitten with Leo over the past few months, and his parents, whom she'd met only once, struck her as gentle and kind, though tinged with a subtle melancholy from the tragedy of losing their other child, a daughter named Laura, to cancer a few years prior. Perhaps, Clara mused, she only perceived this sadness because Leo himself had occasionally alluded to his deceased sister. Leo had presented Clara with a new gown for Christmas. It was a beautiful creation, an unusual pattern of dark green and deep red that perfectly complemented the auburn highlights of Clara's chestnut hair. Clara found it a touch odd, but then again, she sometimes felt she'd watched Vertigo too many times. Leo's eyes lit up when he saw her twirling in it, and he declared he couldn't wait for his parents to see her. They arrived at the grand country estate, and Leo helped Clara shed her winter cloak, while his parents offered polite greetings. Their welcoming murmurs, however, abruptly ceased the moment their gaze fell upon Clara. Leo's mother's eyes welled with tears, and clapping a hand to her mouth, she retreated from the gallery. Clara looked up at Leo, who was smiling. "Mother," he called out. His father frowned, then, recalling his manners, turned to Clara. "Come inside, my dear. You must have a drink now that you're here." "Did Leo never tell you?" His voice trailed off, his gaze lingering on her dress. Clara followed Leo's father into the brightly lit drawing room, and suddenly a chilling understanding dawned. Hanging prominently on the wall was a full-length oil portrait of a young woman with Leo's features and rich chestnut hair, wearing the exact same beautiful red and green gown Clara had on. She spun towards Leo, anger surging. How could he play such a cruel trick on them, on her, on his parents? But when her eyes met his, her anger dissolved into a cold dread at the fixed, unblinking look on his face. He came up to her, taking her hands and gazing deeply into her eyes. "Please, my sweetheart, don't be cross," he beseeched. "They're always so downtrodden at Christmas, forever dwelling on Laura. She was their pride and joy, you know. I just thought you might lift their spirits." His grip tightened, and the feelings of fear and confusion deepened within Clara. She looked helplessly at his parents, who were seated on a plush sofa, his father's arms around his mother's slumping shoulders as she dabbed at her eyes. They appeared so frail and weary. What were they possibly thinking? "Please, darling, let's just have supper. They've prepared a real banquet for us, all the things you love, just for a couple of hours," Leo murmured, his voice a silken persuasion. Was it ingrained social conditioning or a primal instinct for survival? Her skin crawling, Clara numbly nodded. Leo turned to his parents, a bright cheerfulness in his voice. "Mother, father, we're famished. Is supper ready?" His mother rose, visibly steeling herself. "We have appetizers in here. Where are your manners, James? Offer them drinks," she chided her husband. Leo's father turned to Clara. "What would you care for, my dear?" Drinks in hand, the oppressive atmosphere gradually eased, and Leo began to chatter. "I adore the photos you've displayed, Mother. Where did you even find these? This was our last ski trip together, wasn't it? Laura was such a champion. Do you remember when—" He turned to Clara mid-sentence. "Father won medals in skiing, you know, state championships, and Laura took right after him." His father beamed, and their last vestiges of courtesy towards Clara gave way to their obvious desire to talk about their daughter. They reminisced enthusiastically about their family holidays, gesturing to what seemed like hundreds of photos in glinting silver and gilt frames adorning the walls. "Of course, I could never ski like her," Clara heard Leo say, and "Laura baked with Mother." "Oh, Leo, are you still not over it?" his mother responded, almost playfully. Clara's phone vibrated. Discreetly, she pulled it out, silently thanking whatever deity had prompted Laura to choose a gown with pockets. A single word from an unknown sender. "Leave. Who is it, darling?" Leo called, glancing over his shoulder, interrupting himself in a deep analysis of whether he or Laura had been more popular in their academy days. Clara shook her head. "It must be spam," she said lightly, forcing a smile at his mother. Her gaze drifted to the portrait above his mother's head, an image of Laura giving some kind of school presentation. Laura looked directly at Clara. Clara felt a slight dizziness. The wine, the PowerPoint slide in the photo shimmered, and the word was clear: leave. Laura seemed to nod. The voices of Leo and his parents rose and swirled around Clara, a suffocating current. "I need to use the powder room," she announced, her voice strained. Leo's mother showed her the guest powder room, thankfully situated conveniently near the main entrance. Clara stepped inside, and as soon as his mother left, she slipped back out and cautiously opened the heavy front door. "Are you leaving us?" Leo's father stood at the far end of the gallery, looking straight at her, his eyes unblinking. Clara stared back, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Suddenly, a huge crash echoed from inside the drawing room. Glancing through the doorway, Clara saw the full-length portrait of Laura in her gown fallen to the polished floor. Distracted, Leo's father turned, and Clara heard the startled cries of Leo and his mother. She didn't wait another second. Grabbing her cloak, Clara fled into the cold, dark night. Of all the evenings for a dark spirit to call, it chose one of quietude. No raging tempests, no violent cracks of lightning and thunder. The night was still, cloudless, the stars obscured by the distant glow of the metropolis. I was on the late watch in the secluded meditation chamber of the Benedictine Abbey. It was the 11th hour, and no one had yet sought my counsel. I was dozing in my chair when the partition to the other side of the chamber was softly drawn open. Someone stepped in and took a seat. I had heard no one enter the abbey. The approach of a potential seeker was usually heralded by the echo of footsteps on the stone floor leading to the wooden cubicle. This one had arrived so silently that until the moment they opened the door, I had believed myself utterly alone. Still caught in a half-dream, I blinked several times to awaken and turned to view the visitor through the grate. I could not discern their features through the wooden screen, and the deep shadow filling their compartment concealed most finer details. But I could tell they were male and dressed with considerable expense. The individual wore a suit that appeared exquisite, and from the subtle clinking sound his hands made, I knew they were adorned with rings. They glinted, casting strange, warped rays of light on the ceiling that brought to mind ancient evils stirring in primeval mire. "Good evening, Sister Agnes." That voice, smooth as finely polished obsidian, like the glint off a freshly sharpened blade, with the resonant chime of a perfectly struck bell, pure, almost celestial in origin. It rolled pleasingly on my ears, and I felt an inexplicable ease settle over me. Forgive me, for I have transgressed. It has been ages uncounted since my last confession. Despite the smoothness of his voice, his words struck an uncertain chord within me. "That is an unusual beginning, my son." The man chuckled. "Allow me to explain, sister. I am Lucian. I have ministered to an expansive and varied assembly of both saintly and sinful souls. This was not the first time I had been in the chamber and heard the person on the other side claim to be the Prince of Darkness. Most times, such delusions did not interfere with the process. I treated them as any other, spoke to them of their wrongdoings, and tried to offer a modicum of hope that they would find wholeness, that one day they would be free of their fevered minds. This man was different. It must have been the growing dread I felt at his arrival, but I looked at him more closely through the divider. His eyes found mine, and I saw them clearly, even though his face remained shrouded in gloom. Brown irises, so dark they were almost black. As I searched, I noted he bore none of the popular hallmarks of the adversary: no horns, cloven hooves, or the smell of sulfur. This man carried a scent of something akin to burnt cedar and an almost unholy cleanliness, and the vestments of a seasoned magnate. But in my heart, the truth of the matter grew like a weed. I could not deny it. I was convinced by the palpable darkness the man had brought and the unease that prickled in the corners of my mind. It was the same primeval instinct that tells animals they are in the presence of a predator. He was not lying, my confessor. As sure as I would know the incarnate Sun if he walked through my door, I knew this being to be the devil himself. My mouth went dry, my mind went silent, and the only words I could utter were those which had been ingrained into me by habit. "Do you wish to confess?" Lucien laughed. It was a soft sound, 2 parts pain and 1 part joyless mirth. It filled the whole space, but made everything feel hollow. When he spoke again, I noticed his voice slurred slightly, like one inebriated. "I suppose I have. It sounds odd even to me. I didn't know that I would come here until my feet took the path." I waited. My tongue had frozen to the roof of my mouth. I feared for my immortal soul if I were to say the wrong thing to Satan. Lucien took my silence as an offered compliance. "I hope you will understand if I do not make the sign of the cross, considering present company." "Quite all right, my son." "Lucien is fine, sister." I swallowed. I reminded myself I was in a place consecrated to the Creator, that the devil held no power here. But still, I could not keep my knees from trembling beneath my habit. My heart thrummed within my chest with a frantic, desperate rhythm. "Very well, Lucien, what do you wish to confess?" Lucien went quiet. His head bowed in thought. I saw him gather his thoughts, and my fear left me enough so that the gesture struck me as odd. I had only seen such movement before in those truly contrite. I did not know the devil to be contemplative. Satan began to speak. "I confess, the infernal dominion is no longer mine." "Do you mean in that it has been saved through the Son?" Even as I spoke, I felt foolish. Lucien laughed again. "I almost wish that were the case. Does that speak to how dire the situation is? But I suppose you already knew that. I am here after all." I waited, but the pause continued. "How then is the infernal dominion no longer yours?" Lucien did not answer for a moment. I heard him sigh, and heard the clink of gold as he wrung his hands together in his lap. "What do you know of my history, sister? You fell from paradise. You rebelled against the Creator. You seek to undermine his divine tapestry. You studied your own book. Well done. But it is correct in that regard. Yes, I rebelled against the Creator, and yes, I was cast down because of it." Lucien took another moment. The initial fear of him was wearing off. As my mind began to work, I again questioned the strangeness of our meeting. I had expected something more like a confrontation with raw, consuming malice. Instead, it was like seeing a weary, ancient adversary. Lucien spoke again. "Yes, I confess, I wish to take control of the Creator's kingdom. I confess to the sin of ambition, if such a sin even exists. I believed I could do better, so wasn't I morally obligated to see it through. Even when I was cast down, I still gathered legions to my side. What was that you people said all those ages ago? That the Creator incarnate would come down and allow himself a humiliating sacrifice. A fool's bet, I said. I had met the Creator. He would not do it. He could not do it. He was soft. He could not even bring himself to destroy me, and I had done many things to deserve such a punishment. The Creator had limits. But he did do it. My own boldness surprised me. I saw Lucien turn to look at me. The unnerving idea came that not only could he see me in perfect detail behind the screen, but that he could see through my very skin and into the darkest desires of my soul. When he spoke, his voice was soft, and I felt that sense of danger return to me. Cold sweat broke out across my brow. Lucien's voice barely broke above a whisper. Yes, he did. For a moment, I held my breath, praying silently to the sun to preserve me. I felt no calming sense of peace, only the stillness of a death heaven. Lucien remained quiet as he continued. I take no offense, sister. You are not the first to speak those words to me. The minute the sun rose from that tomb, I lost what control I had over my subjects. In their eyes, I was wrong, no longer to be trusted. Odd, considering they were the ones to give me the moniker, Master of Deception. Lord Mammon was the first to sever his allegiance. He led the most away. That made everyone bolder, and soon the dark sovereign Lilith departed. Then there was Baal with his sycophantic cultists that seemed to serve everyone and anyone just for some small notoriety. He had never gotten over the humiliation at Mount Carmel, felt like he needed to prove himself. They all turned upon one another. The infernal dominion was awash in the ichor of its own denizens for almost a century. And is this why you have come to me? I shivered as I felt Lucien's gaze upon me once more. Patience, sister. Isn't that what you preach? It was silent for a long time. I forced myself to remain quiet. I had begun to sweat, even though my cubicle felt icy cold. I was left with nothing. None of my subjects remained loyal. I was watching the battle for the infernal dominion as a spectator. No one rallied to my banner. No one remained loyal to the one they had elected as lord. Somehow, among my own people, I had fallen a second time. It was inexcusable. But I had nowhere left to turn, no manner of recompense. He stopped speaking again. But this time, I felt something more than just dread. A great turning point suspended above us. I do not profess the gift of divine foresight. The feeling inside of me was not so divine. I felt some primal shrieking terror urge me to halt. Some unevolved part of myself begging for him to stop, to halt the confession and not to hear any more. I knew that if I continued to listen, I risked crossing the boundary of sanity and plunging into the abyss of madness. I held my soul in one hand, haggling with infinity for the price of a devil's story. In my foolishness, I disregarded it all. I stayed silent and ushered in my own damnation. Sister, Lucien's voice was soft again. Do you know there are depths deeper than the infernal dominion, darknesses where even I have not ventured? The arrogance of the enlightened is that he thinks he has gone further than all else. I share his shame. In my search for the power to crush the rebellions of the infernal dominion, I stumbled on that which I should not have even considered. Things the Creator himself would not challenge. Things that were meant to remain untouched. Through the screen, I saw Lucien look down to his hands, almost as a child confronted with their own misdeeds. They were rumors at first, odd mentions, stories forgotten. But I searched them, and as I investigated, those rumors grew into theories, and then into realities. Beneath the very foundations of existence was might untapped. I was certain of it. With that certainty, I went into the dark and journeyed through that forgotten gloom for a century. Lucien turned to look at me again. In the shadow, I saw his eyes clearly, as I had before. In them, I saw a nascent madness, yes, but deeper, I saw a profound, chilling terror. I found things, entities that existed before the Creator himself. Creatures whose names I would not utter even in the full light of day. Beings twisted by a malice so absolute, a primal agony that superseded all semblance of reason, replacing it with raw, unfathomable power. They understood nothing but the desire to pull every organized molecule and subparticle into a storm of devastation. Lucien's voice hitched. He swallowed. In the early days, I would have never, but I was desperate. I became aware of a deepening void around me, a palpable absence that grew stronger in Lucien's silence. In the chamber, I felt the phantom touch of countless unseen gazes upon me, and I wished to hide. But I could not. I knew I could not. I had stepped over the threshold, and by acknowledging these beings, I had opened a conduit to their awareness. Lucien continued. I tried to tell them, my old subjects. I warned them of what would happen if they persisted in their petty war. I was the true master of the infernal dominion. I had built this place up from rubble, in the very defiance of the Creator himself, and still they dismissed me. When I told them of the great evil I had at my fingertips, they did not believe me. They thought my mind broken. Imagine that. In Lucien's next pause, I hazarded a moment to speak. I could no longer exist in silence without fearing my own annihilation to beings unseen. What did you do? Lucien looked at his hands again, so childlike. I awakened them. Unbidden to my mind leapt images of carnage. I do not know if it was a vision, but I saw the infernal dominion crumbling to dust. I felt that void again, a twisting and roiling mass that made my mind race. I saw it grow to swallow Lucien's kingdom, and felt its insatiable hunger reverberate through my very being. My spirit screamed, rent by the sheer chaos and encroaching oblivion. I knew if I persisted in this state for long, I would lose my mind. Then all in a moment, I was snapping back to the hushed quiet of the chamber. So swallowed up in what I had seen, I almost missed Lucien's next words, and the slight tremble that they contained. All I desired was the Creator's throne. I knew I could be better. I could do better. Those beings now holding sway over the infernal dominion, over the very threads of human and divine fate, they are not like you or I. They desire neither control nor salvation. To them, both paradise and the underworld are mere flotsam on the cosmic tide. I heard the clink of gold again, and I assumed Lucien was playing with his rings. I confess, the infernal dominion is no longer mine, and soon the mortal sphere will no longer be the Creator's domain. Nothing will. I stared at Lucien through the screen. He looked at me, and in his veiled countenance, I saw the true desolation of his condemned existence. What I had thought was a terrible joke, a trick, was in fact the most sincere form of remorse from the Prince of the Abyss, a transgression so profound even he sought absolution. Lucien looked at me again, and I could tell we both felt empty. For what it's worth, I apologize, sister. I had hoped to rule this world. Now I must watch it crumble. It will descend into ash and decay. The very portals of paradise will corrode and fracture. Angelic forms will lie strewn and decaying. The demons already lie in the dust. A day, a week, a millennium, who knows when what I awoke will ascend. But mark my words, it will ascend. And I will be sole witness to the ending of the Creator, a solitary atom in the chaos of uncreation. That is my eternal burden, and I shall carry it. Lucien paused, then continued. This is all I can remember, sister. I am sorry for this, my greatest sin. For a moment, I was so swallowed up in hopelessness that I forgot to offer penance. But what penance could I offer? When I looked through the grate again, Lucien had left. I stumbled out and tried to follow him, but found no trace, no evidence he had come and conversed with me, that he had confessed to the imminent end of everything. I do not know if I crossed the threshold of insanity that night or the night following. After Lucien's confession, I returned to my cell and slept through the day and into the next night. In my sleep, I had a dream. I traversed an endless gloom. Colossal entities stirred nearby, things with sinuous forms and countless appendages, small perverse things with claws that bit and tore, creatures with terrible wings, bodies made up of whirling geometries that twisted the very fabric of logic. They were distinct yet interconnected, forming a single, sweeping entity. Before me appeared a great seat carved from the void itself. I set myself thereupon, and was engulfed by a maelstrom of the known and the utterly unfathomable. I felt the seat dissolve beneath me, and fractures erupted across my own being. My lifeblood spilled, vaporized by the searing presence of those terrible entities that then brought the entire scene to a sudden annihilation. And once there was nothing left to tear, rip, or destroy, they left. Only the void remained. In that frigid vacuum I endured 1,000 ages. Then I awoke. I am no prophet. I do not pretend to know if such things are portents to come. I know a part of me has fractured, but the fallen one promised the ascent of those below. I await that dawn with a terror that chills my very soul, the day the Prince of the Abyss, with fear in his ancient eyes, foretold. Alara had endured a year that would break most. A sudden disability had stolen her independence. Her job had vanished, leaving her destitute, and the strains had finally severed her marriage. Yet, a sliver of hope had appeared in the form of a friend's spare room, swiftly followed by a part-time job under a boss who truly understood her new limitations. 3 consecutive days of leave stretched before her, and Alara decided a proper reset was in order, a solo camping trip. Opting for comfort over ruggedness, she bypassed the more primitive wilderness trails, heading instead for Maple Grove campgrounds, roughly an hour's journey from her secluded home. She was, after all, more of a glamper these days. The entrance to Maple Grove was disarmingly quiet, almost neglected. The elderly attendant at the check-in booth, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, merely waved a hand at the empty park, allowing her to choose her spot. There were no other guests, he explained. When Alara inquired about local wildlife, particularly bears, he dismissed her concerns with a shrug. Good news, she thought, as bear shelters could get stifling in summer. She selected the most secluded pitch, an isolated patch nestled deep within the trees. Her trusty SUV was quickly transformed as she folded down the rear seats. She unpacked her tent, quickly assembling her bedroll. As dusk began to paint the sky, Alara gathered fallen branches for a fire, then prepared a hearty meal of red beans and rice, infused with spicy sausage, making the most of the dwindling daylight. Before eating, she meticulously laid out a protective circle around her campsite. She queued up her downloaded playlist, a necessary precaution given the complete lack of cell signal, and began her ritual. Dancing through the element summoning, holy water misted the air from a pump-action water pistol. She silently invited Hecate and Pan to share her meal, a quiet offering of gratitude and respect. A final gesture, she wrung her sweat-soaked cloth into the crackling flames. The sun dipped below the horizon as she ate, casting long, purple shadows. A quiet evening followed, punctuated by the slow draw on her pipe and a sip of whiskey and water, as the first stars pricked the darkening sky. A profound sense of release settled over her. The grime of the past year felt scrubbed clean from her soul, even as the camping dust clung to her skin. She offered a silent thanks to the ancient gods for their solace, then gently released them from her vigil, leaving the protective circle undisturbed. Retreating into her tent, she lay back, watching the myriad stars through the mesh ceiling. Her music faded, replaced by the natural symphony of crickets and cicadas. Alara awoke abruptly, a shiver chasing away the last vestiges of sleep. A low, persistent rumbling vibrated through the ground beneath her. But it wasn't the rumbling that truly seized her attention. It was the sudden, sickening slap-smack against the side of her SUV, wet and heavy. An unnatural silence hung in the air. The usual chorus of forest noises was absent. She peered through the tent's mesh windows, but her vehicle was utterly obscured, swallowed by an inexplicable shroud of darkness that hugged the ground a few feet beyond her tent. The moon, still high, seemed to struggle against the encroaching gloom. Sleepiness gave way to a surge of pure terror. Fumbling for her powerful flashlight, a 10,000 lumen beacon, she pointed it towards where her SUV should have been, trying to cut through the rumbling. Instantly, a thick fog materialized from the encircling blackness. The beam, which should have illuminated the entire glade, seemed to struggle, slowly carving a path through the mist and gloom. She had to sweep it wildly, back and forth, to catch glimpses of her vehicle. No damage was visible, yet the unsettling wet slapping continued, echoing from the trees surrounding her. Fear solidified into a cold knot in her stomach. She dared not leave the tent. Pointing the flashlight at the source of the last resounding smack, the fog reluctantly parted, revealing a single tree, swaying violently as if struck by an invisible force. Like her SUV, it bore no visible marks, no telltale fluids or viscera to suggest a violent impact. She looked up through the tent's ceiling vent, and terror exploded into an overwhelming dread. The night sky directly above her, framed by the trees, was no longer merely sky. It was a perfect, circular portal of inky blackness, precisely matching the dimensions of her ritual circle. Beyond the tree line, an unholy deluge of darkness flooded the forest, save for the small, illuminated space where Alara stood and pointed her light. It was as if she were trapped beneath an inverted glass dome, surrounded by a suffocating, churning black ocean. The wet slapping sounds persisted against the trees in her car, but the light's slow penetration through the blackness meant new sounds and movements happened before she could pinpoint any singular target. With a desperate click, she extinguished the flashlight and zipped her tent closed, sealing herself in. She lay back, staring at the small, normal-looking patch of sky visible through the ceiling vent. She forced herself to breathe, to empty her mind. Her anxiety medication was fumbled for and swallowed. Darkness at night, sometimes fog, she repeated to herself, trying to rationalize. The unsettling noises continued to buffet the unseen perimeter of her protective circle, but she deliberately misidentified them as raccoons or opossums, then jammed earplugs firmly into her ears. After what felt like an eternity, she almost believed her own lies. Sleep finally claimed her only as the first gray light of dawn began to creep into the sky. She woke much later, sticky and stiff from fitful slumber, the sun already high and warm. Emerging from the tent, her body felt rusty, her mind still hazy from the ordeal. She began to pack, carefully releasing her protective circle. And then she saw it. Within the perimeter of her now disbanded circle, there was the usual debris, a few fallen leaves, pine needles, remnants of her fire. But outside, the forest floor was impossibly clean. Not a single twig, not a stray leaf, not a pine needle remained. Even the undergrowth, the small shrubs and low-lying plants, had been violently ripped from the earth or cleanly severed at the root. Her stomach lurched, a wave of nausea washing over her. She worked with frantic haste, bundling her gear into the SUV. On her hurried drive out, a sense of civic duty, or perhaps a desperate need for answers, compelled her to stop at the check-in booth. She felt she had to warn the park ranger that something profoundly wrong had transpired during the night. The old man smiled, a slow, unsettling grin that gradually revealed unnaturally pointed teeth. "No," he rasped, his eyes twinkling with an eerie understanding. "It's a self-cleaning park. Thanks for staying with us." He waved her off, his gesture disturbingly friendly, as Alara sped away, leaving Maple Grove campgrounds behind forever. The clinking of glasses, the roar of laughter, and the steady thrum of celebration filled the Emerald Crown. Eleanor leaned against the sticky bar, a half-finished cider in her hand, as jokes spilled around her like the cheap fizz of New Year's Eve champagne. Above the mirrored shelves, several screens glowed, all tuned to the scene in Unity Plaza, where a colossal crystal orb hovered, poised for its annual descent, a glittering promise of a fresh start. Eleanor remembered thinking how deeply comforting these traditions were, how humanity clung to them like ancient wards against the encroaching darkness of the unknown. But a persistent ringing had begun in her head, refusing to be ignored. She first dismissed it as the evening's libations or the sheer volume of the crowd, a simple case of tinnitus. Yet it grew a thin needle-thread whine that deepened, layering into a complex, impossible harmony. It was like ancient bells being rung miles beneath a forgotten sea by something that had never known the warmth of a prayer. Her friends, oblivious, only laughed harder, their mirth doing little to ease Eleanor's unsettling gaze. But then, others in the pub began to pause mid-cheer. A woman near the window dropped her glass, its shards scattered silently on the floor. No one laughed now. "10. Stay." The roar from the screen echoed, the crowd in Unity Plaza counting down. The ringing inside Eleanor's head bent, twisting in on itself. The lights in the Emerald Crown dimmed, not a flicker, but a profound bowing, their colors draining as if ashamed to exist. Shadows stretched unnaturally, crawling across the floor where no light should have allowed them purchase. The televisions above the bar began to hum in a chilling unison, their images of Unity Plaza warping into spiraling geometries that made Eleanor's eyes ache with the effort to comprehend. TEF 5. It was then that Eleanor felt it, not the cold grip of fear, but a profound, almost sorrowful recognition, as though something vast and inevitable had finally found the correct hour to arrive. 1. 3. The ringing coalesced, becoming a voice. Not spoken words, but a deep, primal truth that was simply understood. It held no malice for them, it offered no love, it simply remembered, a time before humanity was permitted to pretend the world belonged to them. 1. The crystal orb in Unity Plaza fell and shattered not into confetti, but into impossible, fracturing shapes that unfolded beyond the screens, blooming into the very room, into the midnight sky outside, into everything. The city outside screamed as the heavens above split open like ancient parchment. Stars rearranged themselves into bewildering sigils. The great oceans reversed their tides with a deafening roar. History, as they knew it, exhaled its last, shuddering breath. Eleanor and everyone else knelt, not by command, but by an overwhelming primal compulsion, before a presence vast beyond any human concept of mercy or malice. A god not of endings, but of profound, total revisions. The ringing ceased, and in the absolute quiet that followed, the old world, its pubs, its bustling plazas, its fragile calendars, was gently, irrevocably painted over with something terrifyingly new. A new world was set upon them. But this world would not be governed by man. It would be governed by something far greater than any human mind could ever hope to comprehend. Leo, my older brother Daniel, Chloe, and Ethan. We were inseparable. Our afternoons after school were always spent in the vacant lot at the end of Elm Street, being our gloriously goofy selves. Others might have mocked our love for Comic Cons and cosplay, labeling us losers and weirdos. But among us, those opinions dissolved. If being cool meant adopting the bland, judgmental demeanor of our schoolmates, then we embraced our eccentricity. In a world that often felt cold and indifferent, discovering friends who cherished you for who you truly were was a profound comfort. The city had recently imposed a curfew. Too many children had vanished, their faces plastered on missing person flyers taped to every lamppost. Yet, as long as we remained visible in the lot, within easy sight of our parents' windows, no one ever raised an alarm. And she was always there. The woman who lived in the old house at the end of Cherry Lane. She never emerged, at least not during the daylight hours I saw. Her residence was a known blight on the street, appearing more like a hoarder's den. Through the grime-streaked panes of her living room window, one could discern mountains of junk, piled high like a precarious, leaning rampart. Most days, she simply watched, a silent sentinel concealed behind those dusty lace curtains. Initially, you wouldn't notice her, not until your eyes adjusted to the dim light and the narrow gap in the fabric revealed the pale sliver of her face. She's probably just lonely, Chloe had mused once. She's a witch, Daniel retorted. I swear I heard her yelling at her refrigerator. We would laugh, but whenever I turned to take a shot and found her fixed gaze upon us, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Everything changed one Thursday. I arrived home late, just minutes before the curfew began. Great. I hoped there wasn't a patrol car nearby. Rounding the corner to our house, I froze. Flashing lights painted the walls in pulsating reds and blues. 2 patrol cars. A low groan escaped me. I tried to conjure an excuse should they question me, but the officers were preoccupied, focusing their attention on the open trunk of an unmarked vehicle. And then I saw her. The woman from the old house on Cherry Lane, her wrists bound in handcuffs, being guided into the back of a cruiser. She sat perfectly still, her eyes, devoid of tears or any trace of remorse for whatever offense had led to this, held no emotion. She wasn't watching the officers, nor was she looking at the ground. She stared straight ahead. Until her gaze landed on me, her head shifted slowly, our eyes locked. Her face remained utterly impassive. No fear, no confusion, no shame. Just that flat, glassy stare that made me feel as though she was painstakingly imprinting my features onto her memory. My breath caught, as if her glare had physically pinned me to the spot. Her eyes widened imperceptibly, but never deviated even as the patrol car began to roll forward. I backed away, forcing my legs to move, and hurried home. The cruiser pulled away moments later, and she vanished behind the swirling lights. I closed the door behind me and screamed when a shadow loomed. It was Daniel, pointing at the clock. Dude, where have you been? You almost missed curfew, he scolded. Sorry, it's just the weird lady. I saw her getting arrested, I stammered. Daniel eyed me, then moved to the door, locking it securely. The next day, her stare was still burned behind my eyes. I listened from the hallway as Daniel watched the local news. A neighbor, a Ms. Miller, was being interviewed. She recounted seeing the woman drop something on the sidewalk while juggling her groceries, something tiny, a small boot, blue, with a little space shuttle on the side. It belonged to one of the missing children from the next street over. The police had searched her house after that. The reporter's tone, despite her professional composure, betrayed a deep disgust. They found remains, bone fragments, something wrapped and stored like food, a jar filled with human teeth, and according to the detective, index cards with children's names and dates written on them, the reporter concluded. Ethan barely spoke after hearing the news. We still played ball often, but only when adults stayed close by. Whenever the curtains in the old house at the end of Cherry Lane stirred from a passing breeze, every one of us froze. The house has stood vacant ever since. Or at least, that is what everyone keeps saying. But sometimes, when I walk my dog before twilight, I catch myself glancing up at that window. It's just a habit by now, something my nerves do before my brain decides anything. And sometimes, only for a fleeting moment, I'm convinced I see a shadow shift behind the curtain. For that instant, I feel her eyes on me again, studying my every move. I even called the county sheriff's office last month, begging them never to let her move back. I told them about the night she was arrested, how her head turned toward me, as if it was a silent promise that I might be next on her list. Sarah's parents often reminisced about her peculiar childhood habit. They found it amusing, a typical phase for a child with a vivid imagination. Every night, Sarah would stand on her bed, pull back the curtain of her bedroom window, and wave out into the dark. Same time, same slow, careful motion of her small hand. They assumed she'd conjured an imaginary friend. What they conveniently omitted, or perhaps truly forgot, was Sarah's terrified screams when they once attempted to prevent her from performing the ritual. She was 5, old enough to discern the chilling reality from playful fantasy. Sarah's window overlooked their sprawling vineyard, beyond which a dense forest began, its edge swallowed by the encroaching twilight where the village lamps couldn't reach. During the day, the view was serene. At night, it held a terrifying magnetic pull. The first time she saw it, Sarah mistook it for a man. It stood tall, just at the edge of the forest, a silhouette against the fading light. It remained utterly still, its head cocked slightly, as if listening intently. Sarah spent the first night cowering under her duvet. The subsequent evening, it was closer, directly against the vineyard fence. That's when she observed its arms. They were unnaturally long, dangling well past where its knees should have been, its hands resting on the fence posts, fingers curled like grasping talons. A primal instinct prevented Sarah from screaming or crying. Something deep within her warned that any sound would be a grave mistake. Instead, she cautiously raised her hand and waved. Its head slowly, deliberately lifted. It possessed no discernible features like a human face, merely a smooth, pallid expanse where they ought to be. Yet a mouth was undeniably present, a thin, stretched line, as if perpetually pulled into a wide, unnatural grin. It mirrored her gesture, waving back, not a fluid imitation, but a stiff, practicing motion. From that night forward, it advanced progressively closer with each passing evening, from the forest edge to the vineyard path, then to the patch of grass directly beneath her window. Sarah intuitively understood the unspoken rules. Her nightly wave kept it at bay. A missed night meant it would be significantly closer the next. Once, when Sarah was unwell and drifted to sleep earlier than usual, she awoke to a chilling sound. Not a knock, but a delicate, persistent tapping of fingernails against the glass pane. Her scream tore through the quiet night, so raw it felt as if her lungs might rupture. Her parents burst into the room, flicking on the lights, and the shadowy form outside instantly recoiled, folding back into the darkness with impossible speed. After that incident, they imposed a strict new rule. No more standing on the bed, no more drawing back the curtains after dusk. Sarah's paranoia wasn't rooted in fear of the creature itself, but in the terrifying certainty of what would transpire if she failed to perform her nightly ritual. For weeks, she cried herself to sleep every night until her parents, exhausted and bewildered, finally relented slightly. The curtain could remain open. She could stand on the floor. She could wave once, quickly. The tapping ceased, and eventually, the nightly presence outside her window vanished entirely. Sarah grew up. The family relocated to a new town. The unsettling memories softened, blurring at the edges, as childhood anxieties often do. When she later inquired about it, her parents laughed it off. "You just loved waving at the trees, darling," her mother would chuckle. "You always had such a wonderful imagination." Sarah had come to believe them, until last month. Sarah was assisting her father in clearing out dusty old boxes when she unearthed a photo album she'd never encountered before. It was filled with mundane snapshots, family vacations, birthday parties, the usual sentimental clutter. Then she found a picture, evidently taken from her childhood bedroom at night. The camera flash had caught the glass in mid-reflection, and behind her own small hand, pressed against the window, something stood in the garden. It was closer than she ever remembered, its hand raised, not waving, but pressed directly against the glass from the other side. Her father fell silent, a grim expression replacing his usual jovial one. He didn't laugh this time. "We thought," he admitted slowly, his voice strained, "that if we played along, if we just let you wave, it wouldn't try to come inside." When Sarah asked why they'd never told her, he met her gaze for a long, troubled moment. "Because," he finally said, "whatever it was, it stopped coming after you eventually grew out of the habit." That night, for the first time in decades, Sarah dreamed of her childhood window. She was standing on the floor, just as they'd eventually insisted. Outside, beyond the glass, something waited patiently. Its hand was raised, no longer practicing the gesture, just waiting for Sarah to remember what truly kept it there. My new condo unit felt perfectly secure until Sarah, the building manager, asked me if I'd ever ventured to the 13th floor. "All right, Mark, the locks are all changed. This one's for the main entrance, and this one's for your unit." "Thanks, Sarah." She turned and began walking down the corridor. I was about to close the door when she quickly reappeared. "Oh, and one last thing. The 13th floor is sealed off. No stair access, but it's still listed on the elevator panel. The elevator shouldn't stop there, but just don't press it." She then continued on her way. My neighbor, Thomas, visited that afternoon with a box of artisanal chocolates and a warm greeting. He invited me in for some herbal tea. "Are you married, Mark?" he inquired gently. "No, not anymore, Thomas." "I'm truly sorry to hear that." Thomas's lips tightened and he nodded slowly. His charming little terrier, Buster, then trotted into the room, and he quickly shifted the conversation to his beloved pet. We chatted for another 15 minutes before Thomas politely excused himself. Over the following weeks, I often saw him after work, entering the building with Buster. We'd exchange pleasantries in the lift, and sometimes he'd invite me up to his apartment for a quick chat. I developed a genuine affection for Thomas. Being so far from my own family and friends had been difficult, but his company and our conversations made the transition much easier. His personality was so warm and kind, and he made me feel safe and welcome. Plus, Buster was absolutely adorable. One evening, returning from work, I saw Thomas entering the building, but Buster wasn't with him. He waved and held the lobby door open for me. That night, my sleep was restless. As usual, Thomas seemed to sense my unease the next day. "Still thinking of Emily, are we? How do you know her name? You mentioned it before, Mark." "Oh, right, I must have. Well, I've got something to lift your spirits. Have you ever been to the 13th floor?" he asked as we stepped into the elevator. "No," Sarah said. "It's permanently blocked off." "Yes, for tenants, but not for condo owners. I've got some old personal items stored up there. Care to take a look?" "Sure, why not?" Thomas pressed the button. The lift shuddered and began its ascent. First floor, second, third. "Our floor," Thomas said with a playful wink. 12th, then the 13th floor. The elevator stopped. A soft ding. The doors remained closed. I stared intently at the unyielding metal, my gaze unwavering. Nothing happened. A cold shiver traced its way down my spine. Thomas?" He was fixated on the doors, his expression one of pure contempt. His eyes seemed to glow with a faint, angry red light. Then, the elevator began to shake with terrifying violence. My blood ran cold. I instinctively grabbed onto the handrail, knuckles white. Good heavens! Thomas stood perfectly still, unmoved. The violent shaking abruptly ceased. The doors hissed open. Before us lay a dark, frigid, and utterly vacant corridor. "Come on, Mark," Thomas beckoned with a hand. His eyes were back to their normal, gentle blue. "What was that, Thomas?" "No one really goes up here. It just makes the old machinery rattle a bit." "A bit? Are you all right?" He placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. I let out a shaky breath. "Yeah, I think so." "Good," he said, offering a comforting smile. Thomas then walked over to a wall and flicked a switch. The hallway flickered into a dim, sickly yellow illumination. The walls were a mottled gray, with large patches of plaster crumbling away. A pervasive, damp, and moldy stench hung heavy in the air. The corridor stretched onward before splitting into two divergent paths ahead. The sound of Thomas's footsteps echoed strangely, almost as if they were originating from directly behind me. To the left. Thomas moved with an unexpected swiftness, faster than I'd ever witnessed him. The hallway twisted around several corners, yet each section looked eerily identical. No antique doors, no recognizable storage units. A prickling sensation ran over my skin. I kept glancing nervously behind us. "Thomas, where exactly are these storage units?" "Just wait." Another sharp turn. A corridor much longer than the previous ones opened up. Here, there were rooms with heavy steel bars. "Here," he said, a strange, cunning smile twisting his features. The storage units were mostly filled with tangled Christmas lights, dusty old clothes, worn-out toys, and anonymous cardboard boxes. Then, one unit that was largely empty, except for a solitary car seat, half charred and scraped. In another unit, I saw a child's car seat. Thomas was by his designated unit, rummaging through his pockets. When he saw me approach, his face contorted into an unnaturally wide, unsettling grin. My heart plummeted as I drew closer to him. Inside his unit was a half-wrecked car. "Do you recognize this, Mark?" His voice had become a crackling, unnaturally deep growl. "What? How did you get?" He was now standing right beside the vehicle, still smiling. "You know exactly what this is, don't you?" "Thomas, what's happening? You tell me. Why did you lie to the authorities? Why did you insist you hadn't been drinking that dreadful night?" The car began to smolder, then ignited. The acrid smell of burning fuel instantly filled the enclosed space. I recoiled violently, trying to back away, but the hallway to my left had transformed into an impenetrable wall. "What about Emily and Lily?" Thomas's eyes darkened to a terrifying crimson, and his face seemed to turn completely black, obscuring his features. The car rattled violently. Two figures now materialized inside. A woman in the front passenger seat. A small child in the back. It was Emily, my wife, and Lily, my daughter. They were screaming, crying, frantically pounding on the seats and the windows. No, no, no. My body slowly gave way, sliding to the concrete floor, tears streaming uncontrollably from my eyes. I lay there, curled into a tight ball. Darkness pulsed and flashed before my vision. Suddenly, I was inside the burning car. The heat surged, slowly at first, then escalating to an agonizing, searing inferno. The extreme heat was unbearable, suffocating. Soon, thick, black smoke choked my lungs. I began to cough and gag uncontrollably. My lungs felt like two heavy, burning sacks within my chest. I slammed my fists against the windows, desperate to escape. The piercing screams of Emily and Lily. So loud, I felt my eardrums would burst from the sheer intensity. Ding. I jolted, quickly shuffling and feeling my body. The burning sensation was gone. I was back inside the elevator, lying on the cold floor. The tiled surface felt blessedly cool against my skin. No one else was around. Beyond the open doors, I saw the familiar hallway leading to my own condo. I slowly pushed myself up, stumbling slightly as I made my way to my door. I was utterly bewildered by what had just transpired. I tried knocking on Thomas's door, but there was no response. The next day, I contacted Sarah, the building manager. Apparently, that condo unit had been vacant for quite some time. A man used to live there. He died in a horrific car crash, a collision that also claimed the lives of a mother and her young daughter. The father, I was told, was the sole survivor. This will be my final online post for a while. Tomorrow, I'm going to the precinct. I'm going to tell them what truly caused the crash that killed Emily, Lily, and Thomas. I survived that fire once, but I know I won't survive it again if I continue living this lie. The key card, granted by the Vault Corporation, stubbornly refused to open the staff entrance, leaving Arthur Rhodes with no alternative but to hammer on the metal door until someone finally heard him. His hands were raw from the minute of frantic pounding when the door finally opened. Standing before him was a man in his early 60s, tall and well-built, with deep, weary bags under his eyes. "You're the new fellow?" the man inquired, his tone a mix of question and statement. Arthur simply nodded. "All right, come on in," the man said, gesturing him to follow with a brief wave. "I'll show you everything you need to know." He led Arthur into a small changing room and instructed him to put on a gray uniform. "Number 65 is yours." The uniform included pants, a shirt, a pair of shoes, and a thick jacket, necessary for surviving the cold within the distribution hall. Everything was a size too large, save for the shoes, which were uncomfortably snug, but it was clear that choices were limited. Arthur felt something hard in the inner jacket pocket, a hip flask, still full of an unknown liquid. He pulled it out to show the man. "Ah, good old Wallace," the man remarked. "He worked here about 10 years back. 5 people have worn that uniform since. The flask always stays." "So, I just keep it?" Arthur asked. "Well, it's become something of a sacred artifact by now. Throw it out if you dare." "Myself, I'm superstitious," he chuckled. Arthur, deciding it best not to draw attention, returned the flask to the pocket, maintaining the peculiar tradition. His guide then led him down a series of long, narrow subterranean passages, concrete structures from a bygone era, seemingly built to withstand a nuclear blast, with only a few doors, one for the kitchen, another for a storage facility, and a final one for the surveillance room. The layout of the facility was easily memorized, a good thing since his interview had taken place off-site. "How many questions did those suits ask you before they decided to hire you?" the man probed. "Oh, I think it was about a dozen or so by the end," Arthur replied. "That's not what I asked," the man interjected. "I asked how many questions before they decided to give you the job." "How would I know that?" "I would have. I reckon they decided to hire you before you even showed up. Everything else was just a formality." Arthur decided not to press the issue. He was soon led into the surveillance room, a confined space with a single window overlooking the exterior. 9 monitors were arranged above a narrow desk, cluttered with personal items, old magazines, and half-eaten pizza boxes from the previous shift. In a corner, a red rotary landline phone lay under an inch of dust, clearly unused for decades. "This will be your office for the foreseeable future," the man announced. Arthur silently wondered how annoyed his future colleagues would be if he cleaned the desk on his first shift, but he thought it wiser to keep a low profile until he was accepted into the team. He'd be starting out covering the night shift alone, and any hope of moving to day shift meant avoiding making enemies. "Anywhere I can smoke?" Arthur inquired. "Cigarettes, I assume?" Arthur nodded. "Open the window and hope you don't trigger the smoke detector." The man settled at one of the computers, which had a scanning device attached. Without looking at Arthur, he extended a hand. "Your key card," he clarified. "I need to activate it." Arthur handed over his key card, and the man swiped it across the scanner. "There, now you have access to almost every door in the distribution hall." "Almost every door?" Arthur echoed, a question in his voice. "Yeah," the man paused. "Let's get back to that." He then briefly explained the camera system, how to switch them on and off, and how to access recorded footage. It was straightforward, and with a few quick notes, Arthur had it committed to memory. Night shift hours are 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., followed by a brief change of guard. At 5, day shift officially takes over. Can't tell you who's relieving you in the morning, but it won't be me this time. "So, that's it?" Arthur asked. I just sit here, watch the monitors, prevent theft. Do you own a firearm? The man asked. Arthur shook his head. You're not a police officer. You're not an agent. You're not an action hero. If you see anything on these monitors, you call 911 and hide until help arrives. Your job is to alert the authorities, not to intervene and get yourself killed. I need us to be absolutely clear on that, he stated, his demeanor abruptly shifting from relaxed to stern. We're clear, Arthur responded, a little taken aback. Do you expect these things to happen often? Heavens. No. This will be the easiest job you've ever had. You can sit around and binge watch your favorite show all night for all I care. I'd recommend that old radio podcast Unheard. They have a great episode about the 1993 missing cosmonauts. Never heard of it. Fair enough. Now, these cameras will do 95% of the job for you. As long as you can retrieve footage and point at the screen, you're golden. And if the cameras go out, Arthur pressed. Son, these things haven't malfunctioned since 1998. If something happens to the wares and you can't show us a recording, I'm going to assume you did it. So, the cameras are infallible. Got it. Except for camera number 6, but that doesn't matter, because you won't need it. What? Arthur asked. We'll get back to that, the man repeated. Now, let me give you a tour of the storage facility. They returned to the narrow passage and entered the central door, which opened into a vast distribution hall. Inside, rows upon rows of identical gray plastic boxes, each marked with a 3-digit number, stretched as far as the eye could see. There was no indication of their contents. Arthur had never thought to ask what exactly would be stored within the warehouse, assuming it would be miscellaneous goods like any other storage facility. Yet, the peculiar atmosphere of the place made something feel off. What exactly are we storing? Arthur inquired. Wouldn't know, never asked. And how long have you been working here? Arthur continued. About 28 years, he replied. It's a good job, son, with good pay and benefits. Don't waste it asking too many questions you don't need the answer to. Arthur sighed. While he could abide by the instructions, his curiosity was piqued. He nodded in agreement, trying to focus only on job-essential information. His duties were clear enough, after all. But just as he resolved to ignore the mystery, they stopped in the middle of an outer section of storage shelves. A single door, made of wood with a simple lock, incompatible with modern keycards or technology, stood on the wall. It looked as if it belonged in a residential building. What's this? Arthur asked, immediately realizing it would likely be another unsatisfactory answer. But this time, his guide was more accommodating. Yeah, this is one of the things I needed to show you, he began, moving closer to the door as if inspecting an alien object. Well, I haven't the faintest idea what's behind this door, he announced. You're not serious, are you? Serious as a heart attack, son. There's a reason I'm showing you this. You are not, under any circumstances, to attempt to open this thing, or to enter whatever on God's green earth is hidden behind it. That is not a suggestion, that is an order. But you don't know what's behind it. When I started here back in '97, I was told the same thing, do not open this door, and from my supervisor's tone, I knew to obey. So no, I haven't opened it, which is why I can't tell you what lies on the other side. He paused, gently knocking on the wooden frame. I've had 12 guys under my supervision since then. All of them obeyed the same order, no questions asked, all except for 2. What happened to them? I don't know. I just know that once they went inside, no one ever heard from them again. Arthur found himself speechless, staring at the man with a dumbfounded expression. His guide sighed in response. Look, you're going to be sure I'm messing with you. For the next few days, even weeks, you'll almost be certain I'm pulling some kind of practical joke. So, let's make this simple. You so much as try to open this door, and you're fired. Got it? Yeah, I got it. The man nodded, then began leading Arthur back to the office. And one more thing, he added, turning his attention back to the door. It might not always be right here. Excuse me? It moves on occasion, taking the camera with it as well. Always on the outer walls, just not always here. Then how am I supposed to know which door it is? Just look at it. It doesn't exactly match the rest of the interior, does it? I guess, but... Arthur trailed off. See that stain on the wall next to the door, he asked. Arthur nodded. Yeah, they definitely need to clean that. Looks like mold, he said, completely deviating from the subject. Overwhelmed by the introduction, Arthur let it go, resolving to follow all the man's rules, no matter how bizarre. Back in the surveillance room, the man finally introduced himself. Oh, right. The name's Richard Barnes, he said, offering a hand. Arthur Rhodes, Arthur responded, shaking it. Good luck on your first day, Arthur, Richard said. I'll see you in a few days. Arthur's first shift began, and just as Richard had promised, there was little to do but watch the 9, or rather, 8 functional, monitors before him. Throughout the night, nothing changed. No one tried to break in, nothing malfunctioned. The aforementioned forbidden door remained in view of camera 6 and didn't move. By all accounts, the job was boring, but secure. This pattern continued for the next few days, weeks, and months. He would be relieved by colleagues who barely exchanged 2 words with him at shift's end, only to start again the following night. On the occasional nights that Richard handed over or relieved him, Arthur managed to exchange a few pleasantries. It wasn't much, but it helped him settle into a comfortable routine, and with his salary paid at the end of each month, it felt like he had found something stable for the coming years. It wasn't until half a year had passed that anything remotely interesting occurred. It was an otherwise calm night. Arthur had finally started listening to Richard's recommended radio podcast, Unheard, which he vaguely recalled hearing as a child. He glanced at the monitors, as he did about once a minute, only to realize that camera number 6 had dissolved into a mess of static, accompanied by a distant screech that wasn't coming directly from the monitor. Remembering Richard's advice about possible malfunctions with camera 6, he didn't think much of it, but decided to check the distribution hall. He entered the narrow passage, stepping into the hall for the first time that night, and looked for camera 6. He knew it to be located on the outer southern wall, a short distance from the surveillance room. After a brisk walk, he was there, standing in front of a moldy stain on an otherwise empty wall. The door wasn't there. He did a double take, scanning the rest of the wall, but there was nothing. Even the door's accompanying camera had vanished. Richard had mentioned the door changed locations on a whim, but until this point, Arthur had believed it to be a figure of speech, a joke not meant to be taken literally. Yet, though he knew with absolute certainty where every camera in the building was located, he now stood before a naked wall. The door had vanished or had moved, just as Richard had said. Knowing better than to search for the missing door, Arthur returned to the surveillance room, intending to continue his shift as if nothing had happened. But upon arrival, he was met with a full set of functioning cameras. Even number 6 had magically switched itself back on, again displaying the door that had vanished, unchanged but for the fact that it had relocated to an entirely different wall. Confirming the door still existed, Arthur decided to check the distribution hall again, not yet ready to believe what his own eyes were witnessing. He rushed back into the hall and began his search. He started with the empty southern wall where the door had originally been, then the western wall, bare apart from the main exit, and then the northern wall, which had inexplicably grown a new wooden door. It was truly there. The door didn't match the rest of the interior, looking akin to a fragile wooden door taken from a 50s residential home. It had a handle and a simple lock, but no key. For the first time, he was tempted to open it, but Richard Barnes's earnest warnings remained clear in his memory. He wasn't ready to lose his job just yet. Leaving it at that, he continued his shift as normal until his colleagues came to relieve him. As fate would have it, Richard was the next one in line, giving Arthur the chance to broach the subject. But before he could mention the moving door, Richard noticed something was amiss. It happened, didn't it? Richard asked, a question he didn't need answered. So, it's true, was all Arthur could manage. I can't judge your skepticism. I didn't think it would take this long before the door moved, Richard said. Though, I have to hand it to you, I'm impressed you didn't go inside. I was tempted to. We call that discipline. You didn't give in to the temptation, and if you value your life, it's absolutely essential that you never do. You really don't have any idea what's inside. No, nor do I want to know. As I said, I've already lost people to whatever lies beyond the threshold of that door. As you might have noticed by now, it doesn't exactly abide by the laws of physics we know and love. I'm not going to go inside. I promise, Arthur declared, completely believing his own statement, at least for the moment. "Atta boy," Richard responded, patting him on the shoulder, letting him go home for a well-earned rest. Work continued in an undefinable haze of monotony for another year, during which the door changed locations 2 more times, first to the eastern wall, then back to the southern wall, placing itself directly atop the moldy stain, covering its unwelcome, slimy presence. Arthur stayed on task, keeping an eye on the packages, never coming around to find out what secrets they kept, nor did he intend to. The pay was, as Richard had stated, too good to risk foolish endeavors. Everything was going splendidly, until one day it wasn't. Not much had changed as Arthur arrived for the night shift that evening. The door had changed positions, and Richard had noted it before Arthur took over. He'd saved some leftover pizza for Arthur from the day shift, and explained he'd be relieving him again in the morning because one of their colleagues had called in sick. Arthur glanced at monitor number 6, and sure enough, the door had relocated to the western wall. Apart from this known anomaly, nothing was amiss. "I've only seen it on the western wall a couple of times. It's odd, but don't let it worry you." Richard left him with the pizza and went home for the night, leaving Arthur to watch his next series as the hours slowly passed. Midnight came and went without incident, and his series had reached its mid-season climax. He wasn't going to be falling asleep anytime soon. He opened the window for a smoke, noting how quickly the box had emptied, promising himself he would reduce his cigarette intake in the coming year. Then, as it had on a few occasions, monitor number 6 went dark. Thinking the door would simply change locations again, Arthur paid it little attention. Minutes passed, but when the monitor came back to life, something had changed, something that immediately sent a surge of adrenaline rushing through his veins. "It can't be," he mumbled to himself, staring intently at the monitor, which now displayed the door on the western wall, open. After almost 2 years on the job, Arthur had seen the door change locations only a handful of times, always closed. During that same period, nothing of note happened during his shifts. Seeing it open for the first time was a shock on its own. And though he remained intent on following Richard's strict orders, he felt compelled to investigate at least a little more closely. Leaving his post in the surveillance room, he entered the distribution hall, immediately heading for the west wall. There, in the southwestern corner, was the door with its accompanying camera hanging above, a red dot blinking, signifying active recording. The door itself stood wide open, revealing a narrow hallway that stretched as far as the eye could see, even beyond the perceived boundaries of the distribution hall. It was an impossible construction, yet there Arthur stood, witnessing it with his own eyes. It was an unprecedented situation. He wasn't sure whether to ignore the phenomenon and return to his office, or to close the door and perhaps attempt to barricade it. 2, maybe 3 scenarios loomed in his mind. 1. Perhaps someone had broken in and entered the room, now in unknown but immediate danger. 2. Some unknown entity had broken out, now roaming within the distribution hall, putting Arthur in danger. And 3. It had simply opened, because that's what the door felt like that day, just another variation of the strange phenomena. As he stood there contemplating his next move, something called from the depths of the hallway, faint at first, barely enough to overcome the buzzing of the fluorescent lamps lining the distribution hall ceiling. But then it called out again, a voice, begging for help. "Can anybody hear me?" The voice, a man's, called out from the hallway, far away, obscured by the dark. "Hello?" Arthur called back. "I can hear you." No immediate response came. Arthur took a few steps closer to the open door, getting a better look at the hallway beyond its threshold. The ground was lined with hardwood flooring, and the walls were covered in crisscross patterned yellow wallpaper, partially torn and cracked from years of neglect. Warm lamps hung from the ceiling, dimly lighting up only a few sections of the hallway until it was left in complete darkness at its perceived end. For a moment, Arthur wondered if he'd hallucinated the calls for help, or if the door itself was purposefully messing with his mind. But after a short break, the voice called out again. It was getting closer. "Please, I'm begging you. I need help," the man cried in desperation. "Hey, I'm here. Can you hear me?" Arthur called into the hallway, again left without a direct response. "I can't move. Please, it hurts," the man cried. "I need to know where you are. Come on, just answer me. Tell me you can hear me." Arthur begged, but the man would not reply to anything he said. He would just keep screaming in agony and begging for rescue. "I don't want to die," he went on. Arthur pulled out his phone to call the police, only to be met with a useless piece of equipment, unable to garner a single bar of signal. So, he rushed back into the surveillance room to use the dust-covered landline. But upon picking it up, there wasn't a dial tone or any indication that it had been active for the past decade. There was nothing he could do to call for help. He either entered and risked his own safety, not to mention losing his job, or he followed the instructions given and ignored the man pleading for help. The decision was quickly made. Though he appreciated the job, and though he remained fairly certain that the hallway beyond the door held unknown horrors, he wasn't ready to cower in his office and let an innocent man die. He quickly jotted down a note, grabbed a heavy flashlight from the utility closet, and went to start his rescue efforts. "Hello, can you hear me?" Arthur asked. "Do you know where you are?" He had taken one step through the door, his hand still lingering on the doorframe, not yet entirely ready to proceed without confirmation that the man could actually hear him. "Hello," the voice responded. "Can you hear me?" It would have to suffice, and with that, Arthur proceeded to walk down the hallway. No sooner had he taken his first steps inside than he felt a remarkable increase in temperature caused by an uncomfortably heavy atmosphere. His ears popped from the pressure, causing him to wince from discomfort. He decided to call out again, hoping that the man could finally hear him once he'd stepped deep enough inside. "Where are you?" Arthur asked. He paused, a sudden sense of dread washing over him. He turned back, considering whether or not he should leave him be, but the door he had entered through had already closed shut. He was about to run over and kick the door down, but then the man called out again. "Where are you?" The voice asked. The desperation now turned to almost apathetic exhaustion. "I'm here," Arthur responded, again getting nothing immediately in return. Feeling he had made a terrible mistake, he returned to the entrance in an attempt to get help for the rescue effort. But the door that had closed on him would no longer budge. It wouldn't even rattle, as if it had fused with its surroundings, becoming nothing more than a decorative piece of wood to break the monotony of the wallpaper. He was sealed inside. He started moving down the hallway, walking straight ahead as he listened intently for the man trying to communicate. Minutes passed, but apart from the lights above starting to dim ever so slightly, there was no change in the hallway's layout. Step by step, he moved, darkness looming above, to the point where he was forced to use his flashlight to see even a few feet ahead. Then, as he cast the light ahead, the beam was broken by a new set of walls that ended in a T-junction, going left and right. He approached, met with two dimly lit hallways, both bending around corners. It wasn't until he heard another call that he knew where to go. "I'm here," the voice called out from the hallway stretching to the left. "I'm coming," Arthur responded. He followed, unsure what would meet him at the end. Then, around the corner, he was met with another set of branching paths. The voice repeated its call, and he diligently followed. He was moving around within a seemingly endless maze that was stretching impossibly far beyond the facility grounds. So, to mark a path leading to the exit, he started to tear pieces of wallpaper off at each junction, revealing a stone wall beneath with a faint red discoloration that felt wet to the touch. "I'm coming," the voice said, its emotion fading with each call. Something was wrong. Something more than the hallway existing under impossible conditions. Whatever it was that was calling out for him, Arthur wasn't sure it was human. But as he contemplated his next move, he came upon the first open area of the maze, a room lined with the same floor and wallpaper. It wasn't particularly large, nothing more than a small room, but definitely a change in the maze's monotony, shrouded in darkness in the absence of any light source. He swung his flashlight around to get a better bearing of his surroundings when he stumbled upon something hanging from the wall. It was an odd mass covered in a smooth, drape-like structure plastered to the wall. He took a few steps closer. It was moving, expanding, then retracting as if breathing. Only then did he realize the vaguely humanoid shape it held, hidden behind a pale pink cover of what could only be flayed and stretched out, human skin, kept alive and fresh by unknown means. There were arms, legs, even a head with non-distinct facial features in the form of empty eye sockets and a mouth with overgrown skin, moving as if desperately trying to scream, but unable to produce a single audible sound. Arthur gasped from shock, but the person trapped appeared to be unaware of his presence. He should have been afraid, and though most of the emotions he felt could be categorized in the same realm as terror, the being fused to the wall elicited no such emotions, but rather an overwhelming sense of pity, as if he instinctively knew that what hung before him was the victim and not the monster. "What happened to you?" Arthur asked, but they didn't respond. He then tried to reach them with a slew of questions, asking about their name, how they got here, and if they could hear him, but no response came. In their condition, he doubted they even knew he was there. With what he suspected to be the victim's own skin plastered to the wall, keeping their insides trapped against the wall, there was nothing he could do to free them without killing them, though he briefly wondered if that might be the kinder course of action. In the end, having no tools but his phone and flashlight, he just reached out and put his hand on them, hoping to bring them a brief sense of comfort. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. But as he stood there in disbelief, he recalled that a voice had called out for help, and if it wasn't whoever was trapped on the wall, someone or something else had lured him in there. Then the voice called out again, "What happened to you?" The voice called out, now completely rid of any human emotion, letting its mask slip as it again repeated his own words back to him. Arthur turned to run, only to realize that the path he'd come through no longer existed. The hallway had collapsed into itself in a twisted amalgamation of wood, stone, revealing raw flesh hidden beneath the thin stone facade as the maze broke itself apart. "I'm so sorry," the voice called, now with a loud, guttural cry that reverberated through the room. With the floor twisting around, Arthur swiftly lost his footing and fell on his back, dropping his flashlight in the process. As he lay there, he could only witness as the room started to contract, tearing itself apart in an effort to swallow him. In the process, the lump of human fused to the wall was consumed, crushing the person trapped within, their bones shattering, their organs ripped to shreds. Arthur tried to crawl backward, leaving the room into another hallway that led deeper into the maze. Once on semi-solid ground, he shot to his feet and ran blindly down the hallway, praying he could find a path that looped around, leading him back towards the exit. But instead of finding any diverging path, he was once again led into another room, this one far larger than the one before. No sooner had he entered the room than the hallway behind him closed shut. Wherever he now found himself, he was trapped there. But, as dire as the situation was, the room appeared intact, not actively trying to consume him. Without his flashlight, he pulled out his phone to light the way, only to realize that it had shattered during the escape. Without it, he was left with little more than a lighter to illuminate the path ahead. The fire of the lighter was weak, unable to reach any of the room's four walls nor the ceiling above. He stretched his arm up as high as it would reach, but above loomed nothing but a black void, stretching for a seemingly infinite distance up into nothingness. With no other options left, he started walking forwards into the darkness, praying for a miraculous escape. Instead, he found something that sent shivers down his spine, an abomination that couldn't have been conjured by his wildest nightmares. Before him hung a mass of flesh, similar to the one he'd found before, with pale skin stretched across it, but far larger, and with no human features that could be discerned. A large hole was revealed in its center mass, a mouth with rotten teeth of different sizes. Arthur froze, unable to move, not even able to form a coherent thought. The monstrosity before him remained inactive, but its mere presence had rendered him paralyzed. "What is your name?" The thing asked in a loud, broken voice that echoed throughout the large room. Arthur didn't respond at first, still awestruck by the sight. A thought had begun to form in the back of his mind as he finally began to understand, but it was too vague. The monster needed something from him. That was the only reason he was still alive. "Who are you?" the monster repeated. "My name is Arthur Rhodes," he said. "What do you want from me?" The room fell silent for a moment, as if the mass of flesh analyzed his question. "What do you want from me?" it repeated back to him. "What the hell are you?" Arthur let out in almost a scream, a mixture of anger and fear. "I am," it began before trailing off. "I am the memory of all of mankind. I am what remains. What do you want?" It didn't respond. Again, the temperature increased, but the creature didn't attack. It waited for him to speak. "What happened to the people that came in here?" Arthur asked. "We're the same," it responded. "What does that mean?" Arthur asked. "We're the same," it said again. "You will join us." "Eno," Arthur meekly responded. With that, the ground started to move again beneath his feet, pulling and shifting in an attempt to make him fall. With the entrance closed, he started to move towards one of the other walls, still out of sight in the darkness. But with one misstep in the moving structure, he was sent plummeting to the ground, almost knocked unconscious in the process. He could feel himself sinking into the shifting floor, the wood and stone giving way to flesh as it began to wrap around his body. A sharp pain shot through his chest as the floor constricted, as if something hard and small was pushing against it. He reached for his jacket to find the hip flask that had belonged to his predecessor, still filled with alcohol. Unable to claw himself out, he went for the only strategy he could think of to avoid becoming one with the collective flesh. He poured the alcohol out around him, grabbed the lighter, and lit it on fire. Within a split second, a bright light formed on the flesh-riddled floor as the alcohol combusted, spreading the flame across the dried, hardwood floor, quickly reaching the wallpaper, which immediately followed suit. The flesh retracted, letting out a horrific screech as its muscles and nerves burned, producing thick, black smoke in the process. The walls retracted as best they could, revealing an exit. Arthur shot to his feet, the floor too preoccupied by the fire to consume him. He started running, blind from the smoke, unable to breathe. Yet, even as the oxygen was pulled into the flames, the screeching continued, letting out 1,000 agonized screams in different languages as each and every one of the victims of the flesh burned. Using the marks in the wallpaper as a guide, he tried to make his way back to the entrance, but with the fire spreading and the smoke thickening, he couldn't see, much less breathe. His vision began to turn blurry, and his muscles weakened. He felt his legs give in under him, and with a clouded mind, he fell to the floor, passing out before he could make an escape. There he lay, the smoke above him, barely a thin layer of oxygen to keep him just on the brink of consciousness. His thoughts lingered on the fleshy amalgamation in the maze. He wondered how many had succumbed to its trap, and where it had come from. He wondered if the fire would kill it, or just slow it down as he died, giving it a much-needed respite before luring in its next victim. He wanted to stand up, but his body was too weak, too wounded. Then he felt something grab onto him, and he was too weak to fight back. But rather than feeling himself getting pulled down into the ground, something lifted him up, and the grip wasn't rough and hard like the maze had been, but soft and comforting. He looked up, seeing a familiar face glaring down at him. "Stay with me," Richard yelled as he pulled him away. "How did you—" Arthur began, before finally losing consciousness. Arthur woke up on the floor of the distribution hall, Richard standing above him, and the sound of sirens blaring loudly outside. The door he had entered through no longer lingered, having erased itself from the wall alongside any evidence of the fire. "You're going to be all right," Richard promised. "It's over." Richard looked equally pissed off and afraid, and though Arthur didn't quite understand how he'd found him within the maze, he'd never been happier to see a fellow human being. "Do you realize how stupid that was?" Richard asked. Arthur could only respond with a weak nod. "We could have died, both of us." "I'm sorry," Arthur managed to get out, barely a whisper. A squad of the fire brigade entered the distribution hall, donning fire-resistant uniforms, gas masks, and oxygen tanks. And though the hairs on Arthur's body had been singed away and his face was covered in soot, the immediate danger had already passed, leaving the rescue team confused and annoyed. Nevertheless, with low oxygen saturation and second-degree burns covering his body, he was brought to the hospital where he was held over the course of 2 weeks while he recovered. No one came to visit during the first week, not even Richard. Arthur tried to call into work using the hospital phone, but no one answered. It wasn't until the second week before one of the company supervisors visited to inform him that, following a thorough investigation, he had been fired, and that he was no longer welcome on company properties. No questions were asked about his experiences during that night, nor would they give him the chance to explain himself. He asked to speak to Richard, needing at least one person to understand what had happened, and why he had chosen to walk into the maze. Again, his request was denied, though they did inform him that Richard was put on administrative leave pending investigation, and without any current contact information, Arthur has been unable to get a hold of him. To this day, he hasn't made any attempts to contact Arthur, but Arthur keeps waiting for the phone to ring. He just needs to talk about this with someone that understands, and above all, he needs to thank him for saving his life.